If they want egg donors, you're going to get advertisements at Yale and Harvard and Columbia. But if you want surrogates, you're going to see advertisements on military bases. Like, it's just two totally different demographics, right? They want the young, healthy co-ed for the genetic stock, but they need just worker bees for the surrogacy
Wow.
pregnancies. I can understand that in a struggling marriage, there are situations where there really are burdens on behalf of adults to work it out and to stick it out. I concede that somebody that experiences same-sex attraction or identifies as gay or lesbian has walked a difficult road. And like so many other people, they long to be parents and might be an incredible mother or father. None of that supersedes a child's right to be known and loved by their mother and father. If adult fulfillment is the highest good, children are always going to be the required sacrifice. This thing that I have not yet found a way to fight against, and it is adult self-interest.
It feels like that has a runaway train. I don't. Do you see that being rowed back? So, Katy Faust, myself and Brett are thrilled to have you on our show. I've been following your work for a long, long time. I'd love if you'd start by telling us about where you came from, your own childhood, what kind of, I think, just like myself and gender dysphoria, it gave you a lived experience that people can't argue with. And I think it's very important to the conversation we're going to have. I know I've been reading a lot about you recently, and I love the concept of the pro-child activist. I love pro-child politics. I'm very interested in all that. But could you tell us where it all came from at the beginning and your childhood? Because I think it does influence where you came from.
Yeah, absolutely. It's first of all, let me say it's a delight to be on with you. I have been following you. Like, if
Oh,
we're going to do some fangirling, it's heading your direction from me. I think Jen Spec is
oh,
amazing.
thank
Obviously,
you.
hopefully, you guys can say we've got some notches in our belt as it relates to rolling back this insidious ideology that
Yeah.
targets children and damages them for life. So I
Absolutely.
hope that everybody listening understands that Jen Spec has had a massive role to play in stemming the madness. So subscribe to their channel and follow them and send them money. So
That
let's
means the
just
world. Thank
talk
you,
there.
Katie.
Yeah.
Didn't
So
expect
it's
that.
interesting because I did not get into this child defense business because I had an axe to grind or I felt horribly damaged from my childhood or anything like that. I got into this because, especially when gay marriage began to be debated in our country, I heard two things coming from gay marriage activists. Number one, if you disagree with gay marriage, that means you hate gay people. And I was like, hold on there. I don't think so. Because, like almost everybody else that is a conservative Christian who believes in traditional marriage, we love our gay family and friends. We're working really hard to stay in relationship with them, even though we're refusing to compromise on what we believe a lot of the time. But that stung for me because my parents divorced when I was 10. My dad dated and remarried, and my mom repartnered with a woman. So I spent, like, after their divorce, 50% of the time I was in a lesbian world, where it was her and her partner and all of their friends. And that just felt honestly like normal to me. I never had any major conflict or rift with my mom or her partner. It was a very stable relationship. I don't consider her partner to be my mother, but I totally consider her to be my friend. So I didn't ever go into this feeling like I was a father starved child because I would still had connection to my dad. What I learned from my childhood is I'm just really comfortable with the in the gay community, to be honest. So it rankled my feathers when somebody said animus and homophobia is the only motivation for rejecting gay marriage. But the big thing that really chapped my hide was this promotion of same-sex headed households. Like, if the gay marriage camp did talk about children, which normally they didn't, they're like, well, marriage has nothing to do with kids. All kinds of heterosexual couples don't have children. So obviously this institution is just about adult desires and identity and feelings and um, validation. But then if they did talk about the kids, they'd say, oh, but by the way, kids love having two moms or two dads. And I'm like, now hold on there. When a child has two mothers, that is a child who has lost their father. And when a child has two fathers, that is a child who has lost their mother. And I had been working with kids in some capacity, whether it was in youth ministry, whether it was as the assistant director of the largest Chinese adoption agency in the world, whether it was just a mother myself and having other kids in my home that were their friends, watching them deal with different childhood struggles. I had never met a kid who lost their mother or father and thought, no big deal, I love this. At minimum, they are curious about the identity and reason why they're not connected to their mother and father. But much more often, it created a lifelong wound that hampered their development, destroyed their self confidence, and left them hungry for the maternal or paternal love that they were lacking. So that's why I got into it first, just writing at an anonymous blog, because I thought somebody needs to speak up on behalf of kids in the area of marriage and family. There was nobody formally representing their interests. And even the conservatives that were fighting for traditional marriage, they mostly did that in the name of protecting religious liberty, not because children's right to their mother and father were going to be upended, ignored, um, and and dashed to pieces if we legalized a form of marriage that made husbands and wives optional. So that's kind of why I got into this. There's kind of personal touch points, but the real motivation is just rage. I was enraged that people were forcing children to sacrifice for adult ideologies.
So, if this is your primary concern with gay marriage, could you simply take the position that gay marriage is fine, but adoption is not in that
Here's the
circumstance?
problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the problem is that marriage and parenting law are linked at the hip.
Hmm.
There's no way to redefine marriage without redefining parenthood. So we've got 10 years under our belt of the impact that gay marriage has had on family law. And what have we seen? We have seen infertility redefined,
Hmm.
that now it's not just heterosexual sex after 12 months that doesn't result in a live birth. Now we are seeing same sex couples being deemed infertile, or single people being deemed infertile, so that insurance or state coverage is going to facilitate the manufacturing of motherless or fatherless children through IVF.
Hmm.
We've seen the words mother and father stripped from parenthood laws at the federal level and at the state level. And what you cannot name, you cannot defend.
Hmm.
And so we are weakening children's claim to their own mother and father. We have seen new pathways for parenthood created. It used to be that if you were a biological parent or an adoptive parent, you could take possession of a helpless newborn. But now, in the name of adult equality, very often under the guise of it's unconstitutional not to allow same sex couples equal access to children, we are creating new pathways for parenthood where if adults intend to parent the child, they will get the manufactured baby taken home, whether or not they are a convicted pedophile, a foreign national, a single, double, or triple male arrangement. And so there's no way to simply say, you can have gay marriage without also overhauling all of parenthood laws.
Right.
That affects not just the children who are made intentionally motherless or fatherless, that affects all parent child relationships. When the state can determine who is and is not a parent regardless of biology, they can unassign you from the parents of your own child. So we're really dealing with pretty dangerous precedent as it relates to how we think about the parent-child relationship. And unfortunately, it does stem from the redefinition of marriage.
Would the concept of civil unions have changed anything? Because a lot of people were in favor of that in lieu of marriage.
That's what a lot of us wanted. I
Hmm.
thought civil unions was a great idea. We
Hmm.
proposed that. A lot of major conservative Christian organizations said, hey, we understand that you have dignity
Hmm.
and you have some interest in visiting one another in the hospital or receiving some kind of tax benefit. Like most of us were pretty amicable to that idea,
Hmm.
but that was not enough. It was the gay activists themselves that said, nope, that makes us second class citizens. We want marriage. And they got it. And kids have lost as a result.
Have you got research that you could tell us about that would explain why or how much it impacts the child not to have a father or not to have a mother, or the impact of that?
Yeah. So the data on father loss, it's not just mountains, it's mountain ranges. We actually have complete agreement on the sociological spectrum from left to right on the harm of father loss. You can measure it in a variety of different ways.
Mm.
Losing your father actually impacts children's physical bodies. It impacts them at the cellular level. There was a study that came out in 2017 on the length of the telomere, that's the end caps of the chromosomes, that are responsible for health and longevity. And when children lose a father to death, incarceration, or divorce, their telomeres get shorter. It literally it literally changes the shape of their cells, every cell in their body. It makes them sicker. It makes them more prone to an early death. It is pretty dramatic, the loss of a father. And then you can measure that sociologically too, as we look at things like 90% of homeless youth didn't have a dad. 63% of kids that commit suicide don't have a father in the home. 71% of teen pregnancies come from a fatherless home. 70 to 85% of teens that are in state-run criminal institutions didn't have a dad growing up. Children are 4 times more likely to live in poverty if they have a single mother. Like, there's no social ill you can look at that does not have something in common, and that is they're overpopulated with fatherless children. So the case against father loss is ironclad. The case against mother loss is harder to make from a statistical standpoint just because it's so foreign to our species.
Mm.
Mother loss is rare for us because biology makes mothers absolutely non negotiable for the first 9 months of their development. And then on the other side of the womb, there's all kinds of chemical and nutritional and emotional features that bond mother and child to one another in ways that make her abandonment and loss much less likely. And back in the eras where we had mothers die during childbirth, the baby wouldn't continue to live. Very often the baby would die too. No mother, no baby. And so this idea that mothers are optional, we don't have the same level of research on it. A, because it's not as common, and B, it's actually unethical to study newborns by depriving them of their mother. Most of the studies that we have on mother deprivation or mother loss comes from rat studies because we won't do it on human children.
Wow. I'm just contemplating that. My own experience of giving birth, and it was the most animal I ever felt, that it really was. I'm an animal in bed as well.
Stella.
It's
No,
all you guys told me that we were going to have fun in this interview, but I did not
Yeah.
know how much fun we would have.
but yeah, I remember this contact with my son in particular. Just it was an extraordinary feeling. Not even nothing like it could be matched. You know what I mean? And the two different experiences, both incredibly powerful, both in very different ways. And just funnily enough, I had a natural birth with my daughter, and they put her straight on my chest. It was really beautiful. It was really beautiful and solid. Then with my son, we had a cesarean. I was distressed. I didn't want to have a cesarean. All of that came in, and they did this cheek to cheek that I will never forget for the rest of
Mm.
my life. And he felt it too. We came together. You know what I mean? And
So here's
because I've had that experience, and had I not had it, I would be looking at you going, "What are you talking about? You just need two
so let
solid
me
adults." I
I
would
want to
have,
flip
yeah.
I got to flip the script here. You are like, what you're saying is there was something so primal, so strong, so instinctive, you can't even put words to it. Like, you are just like grabbing your face. There's nothing like it. And yet, Stella, I'd wager you had dozens or maybe hundreds of other relationships. At the time you gave birth,
Yeah.
you had a husband. At one point, you had another child. You had lots of friends. You had parents. You had siblings, probably. And yet, there was something about that one child, that bond, that did something to you internally that no other human has ever done. True or false?
Not matched by anything, by 1,000
Okay.
miles. Not matched
So
by
here's
anything.
the
Yeah.
point. That baby knows nobody else, knows nothing else. They don't have any kind of like higher functioning capacity to be able to separate or segment the experience. You, the birth mother, are the only thing they know. The only thing they know in the entire world. They have no other relationships. They have no other context. You're the only thing that they know in terms of their smell, your sounds, your movement, your voice. And that is why when we have measured mother's presence, mother's skin to skin, we see that that woman alone, the woman that gave birth to the child, lowers baby's stress level and cortisol level in the way
Yeah,
that nobody else's skin will, no other woman will, no other amount of
totally.
like rocking, or there's nothing like it. That child is bonded to you, I would say, even more strongly than you are bonded to him or to her. And when we mess with, when we tinker with that primal bond, we will inflict a primal wound.
Seems to me like so much of this is not only obvious and sort of common sense and intuitive, but it's also things that we've known for a long time. I mean, even before we had all of these fancy, machines to measure neurological development and what's happening in the brain, we had the work of people like Bowlby who were talking about
Yes.
attachment, and we had object relations, and we had all of these other ways of just talking about the importance of those first relationships. And somehow it seems within the last, I don't know how many years, I'm saying maybe 15 or 20, it's like we just erased all that knowledge and just said, no, we can just
Wow.
do something completely Promethean and new and just create humans in a different way.
I think it's been a slow build.
Mm,
I think we've seen the fruits in the last 15 years.
okay.
But the way that we talk about it at Them Before Us is there was three revolutions that took place that brought us to the place where we are now, where I just think that children are regarded as functional accessories
Yeah.
for adults,
Yeah.
right? And so how did we get here? Well, there was a cultural revolution, there was a technical revolution, and there was a legal revolution. So culturally, that began in the 60s, where we started to say expectations around sex and marriage are oppressive. Like that, we need to throw off this expectation that you're only going to engage in a baby making activity with the person to whom you are committed for life, so that if a baby results, that child will have both their mother and father all day, every day, forever.
Hmm.
And that was deemed as oppressive, and we needed to be liberated from those um, traditional expectations.
Hmm.
So then you move in the technological space, where we, in the late 70s, we learned how to manufacture children outside of the sexual embrace. We were making babies in laboratories. And when you're making a baby in a petri dish, it's just as easy to use somebody else's egg or somebody else's sperm. There's no reason to use the sperm and egg of the people that are taking the baby home. In fact, sometimes it's advantageous not to, if you don't have a sperm and egg between you, or if you want a custom ordered child, or maybe there's a medical problem and, this is the only way that someone can have a child. Okay. So we decided to swap a child's mother and father out at the moment of conception, not even at the moment of birth, but at conception. And then we moved into the legal revolution, where we began with no fault divorce that removed the expectation of permanence from the marital relationship. And we, in essence, said this union, this relationship is really just about adult fulfillment.
Hmm.
And if you stop being fulfilled, it can stop being a marriage. And then LGBT people rightly said, well, if this isn't about kids, if this is just about adult fulfillment, if this is just a vehicle of adult happiness, well, being married to somebody of the same sex makes me happy. So we removed permanence as it related to marriage in no fault divorce. And then gay marriage said, we're going to remove complementarity. And there's only one characteristic of marriage that's left that sets this union apart from all other human relationships. And that's the expectation of monogamy, that it's going to be a one flesh union, that there's only going to be two people in the relationship. And that's already falling. You've got I think there was a gay bishop that married four men in Germany a couple weeks ago. There's several jurisdictions in the United States that recognizes polyamorous homes. In Canada, right after they legalized gay marriage, they immediately said that up to four adults can be parents to a child. And so obviously, if marriage is just about adult fulfillment, a lot of people are going to be fulfilled by being married to multiple spouses. So I think all of those different realms, right? The cultural, the legal, and the technological have sort of come together to say that anything that has to do with marriage and family is only about giving adults what they want. And if adult fulfillment is the highest good, children are always going to be the required sacrifice.
Are there any aspects of those three reforms that are worth saving? Or is it just throw it all out?
So children benefit from permanence, complementarity, and monogamy. Like those things did not arise because somebody was just pulling characteristics out of a hat.
Mm-hmm.
All of them actually have a very specific child benefit. Permanence, because children need their own mother and father, not just for 2 days or 2 months or 2 years or 12 years. They need them all their life, right? There is something that only those two adults do for the kids that no other adult can do.
Mm.
And the research on divorce is damning. There was a lot of research done in the 80s and the 90s that said that there is no such thing as a good divorce. Children always suffer post divorce. Sometimes a divorce may be necessary in cases of adultery or abuse or abandonment, but that doesn't make divorce good. It makes it an amputation so that the gangrene does not spread.
Mm-hmm.
So permanence is a non-negotiable for kids. We see devastating results in children's physical bodies, mental health, emotional health, academic health, relational health when their parents divorce. So monogamy is very critical when it comes to kids, because what does monogamy mean? It means that a child is going to be raised in the home of only the two people that made them. It'll only be biological parents in that union if we really stick to monogamy. That's probably the number one criteria when it comes to child protection, because once unrelated adults join the home, especially an unrelated man, risks of abuse and neglect skyrocket. There's no way to add an unrelated adult to the home without increased risk of abuse and neglect. That's not to say that there are not individual cases of heroic, wonderful, sacrificial step parents. But that's not, you can't swap out unrelated adults on a society wide level and expect children to be fine. This is the reason why adoptive parents like me and a lot of other people that are listening to this had to undergo screening and vetting, because you can't just hand a child over to biological strangers and expect them to treat the child as if they had been born to them. So monogamy is probably one of the greatest safeguards when it comes to child well-being that we have in our arsenal of tools to increase child protection and child thriving. And then complementarity means they're getting both halves of the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
Both halves of the human species is represented in their home. And there is no substitute for a male parent. Like a mother, two mothers, 12 mothers will never do what a father does.
Wow.
And vice versa. You can have Dave Rubin and his partner, who is supposedly incredibly maternal, who will never be a female parent. They will never talk to children like a woman does. They'll never discipline a child like a woman does. They're never going to simplify their language the way that women do. They're never going to hone a child's fine motor skills the way mothers naturally do. They will not be able to increase their tolerance for baby cries and respond to the baby more quickly the way that mothers do. They are never going to wake up at the same rate that mothers do in the middle of the night when the baby is distressed. They will never satisfy a child's longing for female love the way a mother does. Not even if Dave Rubin's husband puts on an apron and grows his hair out. He will not be a mother. Children benefit from a female parent and crave the love of a female parent. So unfortunately, if you want to look at what children need, you've got to get back to the place where we say we need permanence, complementarity, and monogamy. That's going to infringe on pretty much every adult that's out there. I mean, that's a worldview that says single, married, gay, and straight all have to sacrifice so that kids' needs are met. But the only alternative is kids sacrifice for you. And that's not something I'm okay with.
Yeah, you're very inspiring, because I know your concept is them before us, children first. Let's put the child first, and you have a high bar. And I remember you once said, once you hear me talking for long enough, I'll offend every one of you. I'm going to get at every one of you, which is kind of bracing, but probably good for us, because it seeped into the culture before my lifetime. This idea of kids are resilient. They're fine. The kids are fine. We've broken up. It was a very difficult breakup, but they're fine. And I'm like, really? I just wonder about that. Like, really? Just because I know I'd hate it, and I see it in my own kids. There's a certain look they have when me and Henry look at each other loving or are being very, and they are made larger from the fact that we love each other. It is absolutely tangible. And yet it's a very, long marriages are very difficult. There's no doubt about it. They're a very difficult thing to do. And there's a culture now of leave if you're not happy. It's about self-fulfillment. You've only got one life. Break for the border if it's not satisfying you. So we're in this culture where we're not putting children first. And you've really thrown a spanner in the works by saying, no, actually, you're all wrong. You need to put children first. But could you tell me your position around adoption? What is your thoughts around adoption?
Well, I think that this is an area where both sides, left and right, have gotten some things wrong. Um, Let me explain. Adoption begins with loss.
Yeah.
A child has to lose something, something they have a right to, before they find their forever family. And I think on the right, we have been hesitant to acknowledge that children experience loss because so many of us have been, and I would say us, I haven't been doing it as long as a lot of people have been desperately trying to beat back the scourge of abortion. And a lot of times the solution that will be given to women in unplanned pregnancies is, well, adoption, adoption, adoption. This is what you need to do, adoption, adoption. And my solution to an unplanned pregnancy is not abortion and it's not adoption, it's parenting. Like, you made the baby, you raised the baby, and it should not just be the woman, it should be the husband, it should be the father. Like, both of them should, both adults in the situation should reorient their lives around the baby and one another so the baby doesn't lose their right to life or their right to their mother and father. But in some cases, if that is not possible, then adoption is the best option. But I think we've spent way too long saying and communicating that adoption fixes everything. It doesn't. And adopted kids are very often the people that will tell you that the most plainly. They often will say, I really love my adoptive parents. I'm very grateful for them. They gave me a lot of love. And I want to know who my mother is. I want to know why she gave me up. And I want to know who I look like the most. And those are legitimate questions that, if you do not properly understand that adoption begins with loss, children do not have the opportunity to be honest about their struggles. Now, the adoption world, especially in the world of domestic adoption in the United States, has moved away from that kind of language saying, like, this fixes everything, and towards this is going to be a process of lifelong understanding as the child understands adoption at different stages, and you, the parent, needs to be there while they unpack whatever grief or mourning or questions that the child has, depending on like age appropriate development. Okay, so that's more how we think about adoption now. But on the other side of things, we tend to think about adoption as, this is for adults, right? This is a way for an infertile couple to have a baby or a same sex couple to get a child. And the answer to that is no, no, it's not. This is not for you. This adoption is not for adults. It's not for infertile adults. It's not for same sex couples. Adoption is about children. Adoption is an institution centered around the rights and well-being of children, where the best interest of the child is king. So adoption is a just society's response to children who have lost their parent. And it's important that we understand that adoption doesn't, I'm an adoptive mom, and I regularly say, I can't fully compensate for everything my child has lost. And adoption can still be redemptive, even though I understand that this doesn't necessarily fix everything.
Well,
So I think we need to be honest about adoption, that it begins with loss, that it can be redemptive, but it is not something that we should seek to normalize, replicate, or promote by saying that surrogacy or third party reproduction is just another form of adoption. In one sense, that's true, because in both of those camps, children have lost their mother or father or both. But in the world of adoption, at least the adults who are raising the children are seeking to mend their wound. But in the world of reproductive technologies, the adults raising them have inflicted the wound. And the only survey that we have that evaluates outcomes between adoptees and children created through sperm donation found that the children that were sperm donor conceived fared worse than adoptees, even though these kids were always being raised by their biological mother. So there is something about inflicting this loss purposefully and commercially that really seems to be distinctly detrimental to kids.
Wow. So much of the way you are framing the question of parenting and children has to do with the idea that adults are putting their own personal
yeah.
satisfaction before something that is transcendent to themselves, which in this case is the well-being of the child. I'm wondering if it doesn't lead us too far afield. in what other areas of culture do you see that basic idea of putting one's interest ahead of any sort of transcendent cause happening?
I want to say, I'll put it to you guys. Is there any place, is there any area, is there any policy, is there any issue, political,
Mm,
cultural, technological, where we are putting children first? Where we are saying their rights, their well being, their protection, their physical bodies, their safety,
yeah.
that is going to be the gold standard for us. And everything else is going to submit itself to them.
But I'm thinking of, for example, Kennedy, uh, President Kennedy famously said, don't ask what your country
Oh,
can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And that, to me, that's an example of there's, some transcendent cause that's more important than me. And like, where else is that type of dynamic taking place in the cultures? What I'm asking.
So I think you can find it individually here and there, pop up. Maybe there are some institutions that are working towards virtue and principle. But our third book that I edited is called Pro Child Politics,
Hmm.
and it was I just conscripted 19 subject matter experts to look at every major issue: education, energy, immigration, national security, taxation, the
wow.
economy, pornography, race. And I said, what would it look like if we put kids first in all of these areas? And it would look virtually the exact opposite of
Oh,
what we have been advancing. Putting children first, right? That kind of aspirational ideal, it always requires that adults sacrifice something that will benefit them, at least in the immediate short term. But the long term is usually good for adults, and obviously allows children, if it allows individual children to flourish, it's going to allow the nation to flourish too. But I think that the greatest power that is driving most of what's happening in the world today, certainly in a lot of the areas that we've discussed, is this thing that I have not yet found a way to fight against, and it is adult self interest. Like, you can say that you're aspirational or you're living by a set of convictional standards, but the rubber meets the road when it comes between you and something that an adult really wants. And that is where you're going to see really what you believe. And I don't see a whole lot of areas, especially in matters of marriage and family, where adults on a wide scale are checking their own self interest so that children's rights are protected. Certainly, once you have your own children and you're raising those children, hopefully, like Stella, some of that sort of, regardless of how you want to look at it, sociological or evolutionary instincts are going to kick in and say, I've got to sacrifice for my own offspring. But you've got to fight against all of the, you know, Instagram divorce influencers who are telling you that as soon as your husband isn't doing 50% of the dishes, you can cut and run. So,
that was 20 years ago. but I wanted to ask you a little bit about this self-interest because, in a lot of, volunteerism is a very good example of how we in the Western world have really lost our altruistic spirit, our concept of helping other people. And I think we lose a lot with it. And arguably, the one thing we do for ourselves is to have children. And then when you have children, your entire being is for them, if you follow me. You have it for yourself, but then if life follows the natural order, once you have a child, you actually sacrifice yourself. So there's a contradiction there. I don't know where I'm going with this, but you know what I mean? You kind of have the child for yourself, but then if you are an unusual mother or father, you give of yourself. And I wonder, is that diminished? I don't know if there is research. Is that diminished if you're less involved in the creation of the child, or I don't know if it's chemical.
well, we have the entire second chapter of our first book, Them Before Us: Why We Need a Global Children's Rights Movement. It talks about the importance of biology in the parent child relationship, because certainly the instinct to have children is, I would say, pretty universal. You can want children regardless of whether you're fertile or infertile, regardless of whether you're single or married, regardless of whether you're gay or straight. I mean, it's natural to want children. But from the perspective of the child, there is something very special about a child's own biological parents. And we've measured it. We've measured it in terms of time invested, we've measured it in terms of resources given, We've measured it in terms of how connected the children feel to the parent and the parents feel to the children. And we've certainly measured it as it relates to protectiveness for the adults on behalf of the children. Certainly rates of abuse, but even just accidental death, right? An unrelated adult, a step parent, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, just allows for more household accidents for children because they're not as attentive to the kids in their home. So biology, like the instinct to have children, is natural and good, but there is something about our instinct for our own children, our own offspring, that does increase level of protection, investment, and connection. And I'll say one other thing, Stella, because you talked about how your children see you loving their father. And we opened that chapter with a marriage researcher and a man who did family therapy for 50 years. And he said, a strange thing happens when a child sees their mother loving their father. They feel like their mother is loving them.
They do.
And when they see their father loving their mother, they feel like their father is loving them. He said, nobody's looking at the child, nobody's talking to the child, nobody is touching the child, but the child is loved indirectly. And he said, it's my only time I've ever really seen that in the pantheon of human connection. Now contrast that with a child who sees their father loving his girlfriend or the mother loving her new husband. Very often, I have not heard a lot of testimonies of kids that say, I felt that same circuitous love. Most of the time, it is competition and jealousy.
Oh,
Get away from my father. Leave my mom alone. Or just, well, they're just, having a little date. Get ready. I'll just wait.
oh,
There's nothing where the child goes, they're loving me, that brings me security. So this idea that biological parents are unlike any other adult is actually the wrecking ball as it relates to people wanting to form other kind of household arrangements, people wanting to disregard complementarity, monogamy, or permanence from the life of their child. Biology is a bigot. It will wreck your plans. If you really believe that children should be safe, protected, loved, and development maximized, identity discovered, you've got to adhere to the laws of biology.
yikes. You are hardcore. But I know your message is like, that concept. It's your principle of children first is very hard to argue with, no matter how much I do. I kind of think, honestly, you've just got to, the children are vulnerable. We've got to put them first. And then I think of, let's say, there's always going to be extraordinary exceptions to the rule. And I know people will be throwing, stuff at their screen while they're listening to us because they'll be thinking of exceptions to the rule. For example, Dave Rubin, I have no doubt, is a lovely, lovely parent. And, I know people, and I've no doubt that they've brought their children up knowingly into kind of, let's say, surrogacy or whatever, into situations where I would say, if you're going to live as if your life is being lived by a principle of this is how life should be lived, this is not what one should do. But the exceptions to the rule, arguably, are what people lean on very heavily. And yet, when I listen to Dave Rubin discuss, because he's a public figure and he's spoken about it on Jordan Peterson, he's a good example. Gay man, had surrogacy, got an egg donated from one woman, and then had two babies. His sperm of one for one baby, his partner's sperm with the other baby, the two babies, then separate pregnant women to carry the babies. Again, creating the concept of the motherless child, so no mother will have claim and the child will have nobody to go to with their mother hunger. Extraordinary concepts were blowing my head off when I was hearing this all detailed out. This has been created so that the child will never be able to satisfy any sort of mother hunger because there will not be a mother, because one gave the egg and one carried the child. As well as that, I often think, because I have heard of it, sometimes the people who break up say, well, I conceive that child, you conceive that one, I'll take my one and you take your one. And what that does to the psyche. So when I heard him speak about it, and he's such a thoughtful, likable person, who I have no doubt is a very good parent, it still made me think conceptually there's flaws there. And I'm sure you have a lot more, interrogated a lot more, Katy, than I have.
Well, it's interesting because you can listen to his conversation with Jordan Peterson and you hear them both talking about obviously it makes sense that both he and his husband, David Janet, wanted a biological child. Why? Well, they talked about it. They talked about how wondrous, incredible it is to see your features in your own child. They talk about how the resemblance they have with their own parents, it's so special. So we look at it from the adult's perspective and we say, well, of course you both wanted a biological child. That makes so much sense. Now flip it.
Mhm.
You think biology is so important to you, but it's only important if you want it. It's obviously not important enough for the child to have a connection with their own biological mother.
Mm.
So, I mean, like right there, you can see the self interest that is driving the machine, right? Biology matters for thee, but not for me, not for the child. Okay. So the child also delights in a resemblance. The child also gets their biological identity from their own mother and their own father. Your desire to have a biological child is overriding the child's right to be known and loved by both their mother and their father. Your desire to have a newborn, because they talked about how they didn't want to do adoption. I understand adoption is hard, adoption is messy. Adoption means you're actually doing serious damage repair for the child, but it is selfless because you're recognizing that there is a child in need and you are adopting a burden on your behalf to try to meet that need. They didn't want to do that. Understandable. But they're instead forcing the child to adopt a burden for them. Now it is the baby who has been ripped away from the only person they know, right? The one who will not have the flesh, the milk, the sound, the words, the smell. Maternal smell in those first few weeks is so critical to the child. But they decided their desire to have genetically related
Yeah.
newborns was more important than the newborn's need for their own mother. And I mean, so you can see, like, if you look at things from we often say at Them Before Us, the victim determines the policy. So if the two gay men that desperately want a biological child are the victims, then the policy is made to order babies, rent a wombs, and catalogs of egg donors.
Yeah.
But if the child is the victim, what does that mean? It means that if you are a gay man and you want a child, you better be in a lifelong relationship with the child's mother and nobody else. Someone's going to do the hard thing. I just don't think it should be the baby.
You know, as you're saying this, there images come to my mind of, I don't know their names, but there's a like a gay couple and they both identify as trans and they're influencers and they've adopted a baby. And what they do is they have videos of the baby and it's like they're holding it next to it's one man in particular who's holding it next to himself and like looking in the camera, and there's no person to person connection. It's look at me and my baby,
Accessory.
and it's so chilling, and it's just so, I hate to say it, but it's just creepy. I mean, it's
Mhm.
a baby as accessory. I think you use that phrase, or children as accessories. I
Yeah,
just had to
I
share
think I
that. Yeah.
know the influencers that you're talking about
Yeah.
because they have been cataloging their journey. The babies are now older than a year old, but I remember the very first video of this guy that identifies as non-binary with braids and these perfectly manicured long nails in a hospital bed where they put one of his shivering children, one of
Yeah.
these shivering newborns on his chest, chin quivering, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, oh, he peed on me. Oh." And then, like, there's nothing that calms that child.
Yeah.
There's nothing familiar to that baby.
Yeah.
And now they will, and here we are going on, our vacation with our nanny. And in none of these pictures do the children smile.
Right.
They have, what is, gosh, what is that called? An apathetic attachment, I
Hmm.
think, or anemic. It's an anemic attachment. The children have not attached.
Yeah.
Why is that? Because mothers, if you could say the big chasm between the male parent and the female parent is mothers promote attachment, fathers promote separation.
Mm.
They are both critical to child development. But if you do not get attachment, you will never get anything else.
Yeah.
I often, when I'm talking to rooms full of people, I say, raise your hand if you've ever seen a baby thrown up in the air. Everybody puts their hand up. And I say, keep your hand up if the person throwing the baby was a woman. And everybody puts
Mm.
their hand down.
Yeah.
Men promote separation,
Yeah.
even from a couple months old.
Yeah.
Whereas women, oftentimes there's women in the room. I'm like, look at the women with babies right now. Most of the time they are standing up, wearing the child wrapped around their body, rocking and swaying. This is
Hmm.
what women do cross culturally and
Yeah.
across centuries.
Yeah.
Those two children have not had a female parent. They have not attached. And I'll tell you, an unattached child is going to be a child that's in danger in danger of all different kinds of externalizing disorders, in danger of developing damaging identities, susceptible to
Mhm.
predatory adults, children that are not going to be able to function on their own and form and maintain healthy relationships. It is a crime.
Yeah.
It is a crime to intentionally and commercially cut a child's mother out of their life.
Mm. You said elsewhere, and I thought it was so pithy and accurate. It's like the question of who am I is the question of whose am I? And
Yeah,
yeah.
we don't need to ask if that's true or not. We have adoptees and we have donor conceived children. We have overhauled our best practice of adoption in this country over the last 40 years, away from closed adoptions, where now 95% of adoptions in the United States are open. The child has some degree of relationship with, knowledge of, connection to their first family, because we know that even if children cannot be raised by their birth parents because of neglect or relinquishment, they still benefit from as many connections as possible, because I just like I can't answer some of the questions my adopted son is going to have. Access to those parents give him the answer. But in the world of sperm and egg donation, this is not this, nobody's donating. Everyone's buying egg and buying sperm and selling sperm. In the world of third party buying and selling, very often they prefer anonymous arrangements. They're cutting these children out, away from their biological parents on purpose. And those children suffer even more. We Are Donor Conceived is a donor advocacy group, an advocacy group for donor conceived people. And they've done several different surveys that talk about how a huge number of them want to know, 90% would like to know or have a relationship with their donor, that is their biological parent. Many of them are distressed that money changed hands through the process. Many don't have accurate medical information. Many of them have puzzle pieces they can't fit together related to their heritage. Identity struggles are the name of the game when you're creating children through third parties.
Where do you think it's going to go? Because in many ways, people would argue the genie has got out of the bottle. You know, we've medicalized children so that they can change sex, apparently. That's certainly the promise they're sending them. And, you know, we're rowing back on that. I do think we've made huge inroads on that. But the surrogacy issue, which is another kind of, it's kind of adult imposition of adult ideologies on children. That's where I see a connection. This is adult ideology being imposed on children. It feels like that has a runaway train. I don't. Do you see that being rowed back?
Where are we going if you're talking about reproductive
Yeah.
technologies? Is if they can, they will cut women out of this process altogether. And this is why. If you want to manufacture a child, you need three things: you need sperm, egg, and womb. So, sperm is very easy to get to, it's plentiful, and it's cheap. Eggs are much harder to get to. Women have to inject themselves daily with all kinds of hormones to hyperstimulate their ovaries so you can laparoscopically extract, not one egg from the ovary, but 10, 20, maybe 30 if she's very, very young and fertile. Oftentimes to the detriment of her own future fertility, which, by the way, there's no informed consent because big fertility isn't studying any of that. But eggs are more expensive, they're harder to get to. The hardest thing of all is to get wombs. That is where the real sort of market deficit is when it comes to supply. It's very hard to find a woman, even if she's paid well, to give her body over for strangers and take on a medically risky elective procedure for 9 months. So, where is it going? Well, we're working towards cutting women out of the process of needing their eggs. There is a technology called IVG, not in vitro fertilization, but in vitro gametogenesis, where they are working towards creating egg cells from some other soma, from some other, blood cell or skin cell or
Well,
saliva, so that a same-sex couple, for example, can both be biologically related. One man can contribute the sperm, the other man can contribute his skin, and they will make an egg cell. And
oh,
then there's the two gametes for that process. Now, of course, that would be viewed as a win for same sex couples who both want to be biologically related. Dave and David Janet won't have to go shop for eggs. They can both contribute sperm, and they can both contribute an egg, and then they can both have 100% biologically related children. They won't have to worry about that uncomfortable conversation with his sister to see whether or not she will give her eggs so that she can be the biological mother of their child and he can be the father and the uncle. They won't have to deal with that. Okay. Now, in fact, you can be mother and father to the child if you're a single man.
Yeah.
Easy, right? So they want to cut women out of the egg process. But it would be such a bottom line saver if we could cut women out of the womb process as well. So they are working on artificial wombs. China has some prototypes. They have been whispering about this. Is it happening already? I hope not. We've already successfully had premature lambs grown in bio bags that they would like to also make available to humans. And that would be very, very helpful to the world of big fertility, because very often it is the woman that is carrying the child that can get in the way of what the purchasing parents want.
Yeah.
If there is a developmental disability and they say, we want to abort this baby, sometimes it's only the woman in whom the baby is growing that says, no, I love this baby and I'm not going to. We had a situation in 2019 where a deaf man in his early 50s living in his parents' basement commissioned 3 surrogate children through a Californian surrogate. And they implanted 2, I think they implanted 3, thinking that 1 or 2 would take. All 3 developed, and he insisted that she abort 1 or 2 of them, because how can a single, like almost retired deaf man care for triplets? And she said, no, I love these children and I'm not going to abort any of them. All 3 were born. All 3 of them were premature. He visited them never in the NICU, but eventually they were healthy enough to go home. And the last report we heard is they were living in squalor in a basement where the parents were also sharing the house with a drug dealer. I mean, like, these are situations where these people would never be approved to be adoptive parents. So
Wait,
it would
this
be
the baby went home to the deaf man in the basement of his parents' house. Is that where they went?
the triplets went home to the basement where the deaf man was living with his elderly parents and who sometimes had a drug dealer on site. And those 3 babies, one of them or both 2 of them would have died if it wasn't for the surrogate saying, I'm not going to kill these kids. So the point I'm making is that the human woman in whose body the children are gestating very often is an obstacle to the commissioning
Oh
parent.
yeah.
Right now they need her. And so they will do things like say, you can only eat this, you can't have sex at these times, you're going to have to, like, you won't travel. Like, they control everything about this woman's body. It would be so much easier to just not have to deal with a real woman at all. So where are we going? It is to create children where women aren't involved in the creation, the conception or the gestation at
Very
all.
familiar. It's very transhumanism. It's extraordinary
Mhm.
how many roads lead to transhumanism. Do you have any profile or understanding of the surrogate mother, who they are and
So,
what's their motivations?
well, yes, I will say that's not our area of expertise. I do feel like there's some really strong, especially radical feminist voices that are doing a good job of representing the exploitation of women side of this. And for a long time, that was really where the traction, and probably still is, where the traction is when it comes to people having some resistance to surrogacy. But generally, these are economically vulnerable women. If they want egg donors, you're going to get advertisements at Yale and Harvard and Columbia. But if you want surrogates, you're going to see advertisements on military bases. Like, it's just 2 totally different demographics, right? They want the young, healthy co ed for the genetic stock, but they need just worker bees for the surrogacy
Wow.
pregnancies. And a lot of times those women have really great healthcare because it's government healthcare, and their husband is gone. They've already had other children. They need some extra income. So the 2 profiles are often very, very different.
Could I ask, we got a question on Substack. We tell people that we're, going to have a prospective guest, and we got a few questions, but there's one that I wanted to ask specifically. They were saying, what is your thoughts about how pedophiles have hijacked terms like children's liberation and children's rights for
Ooh,
promoting,
great
yeah,
question.
very
Uh,
interesting.
so, so I actually get quite a bit of pushback just saying that I'm a children's rights activist. And oftentimes that comes from conservatives who say that term has been way too adulterated and co opted for you to use it. There's just too much of an education hurdle that you need to go over. Because if you Google children's rights, you're going to hear children's right to sexual pleasure or a child's right to have a transgender identity hidden from their parents at school, or children's rights to get testosterone from Planned Parenthood. So children do have rights. They have a few. They don't have tons and tons. They have a few. They have a right to life. They also have a right to the two people responsible for their existence. I'm not making that up. That is straight out of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which has been ratified by every country of the world except the United States, because we are concerned that it's going to conflict with parental rights.
Can I jump in? Jens Beck
Yeah.
created I think it's a beautiful campaign for children's right to go through puberty.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
it's a right to
We,
a healthy process, the right to a free future, the right to actually become mature, and it needs to be protected. And arguably
I
could be protected under the UN Convention of Rights of the Child because it's right to health and it's
I think
impairing
we
their
need,
health by blocking their puberty. I couldn't resist jumping in.
no,
It's called the
you're right.
Memorandum of Understanding on the Role of Puberty in Adolescence. So we're very into it. But anyway, keep going. Couldn't
No,
resist it.
you're exactly right. And the threats to children are so dystopic that we actually need like a new children's bill of rights. They have a right to life. They have a right to their mother and father. They have a right to not be eugenically selected out of existence prior to implantation. They have a right to sexual innocence, right? You can't just, I think that we need porn protection, and we cannot pass off pornographic innocence violating materials to them in the name of sex education. Children have a right to an intact, unmedicalized body by the time they reach
Healthy.
adulthood.
Yeah.
Like, there are so many threats to children that we need a children's bill of rights for things that even a couple decades ago people just said, what are you talking about? Of course
Yeah.
children are innocent. Of course they're not miniature adults. Of course they shouldn't be exposed to a gyrating, fishnet wearing, cosmetically altered man in the 3-year-old preschool drag queen story hour at the library. Of
I know.
course.
And
Of course we,
of course they will have a right to not have adults impacting their future health and their future
yes,
fertility and their future sexual functioning. It's
yes.
astonishing what has come in the door in all these in the just it's really in the last 3 decades.
Yeah.
So you're seeing a children's bill of rights, and are you thinking it will gain traction beyond the paedophile hijacking of the term? You're going pro child politics. Go on, sell it to us.
If I have anything to do with it, everybody is going to be thinking them before us. Everyone is going to be thinking, what about the child? I mean, in all of these different conversations, I will concede there are a lot of different interests, and some of them need to be taken into account. None of them should supersede the rights and well-being of the child. I can understand that in a struggling marriage, there are situations where there really are burdens on behalf of adults to work it out and to stick it out. None of that supersedes the right to the child. I concede that somebody that experiences same sex attraction or identifies as gay or lesbian has walked a difficult road. And like so many other people, they long to be parents and might be an incredible mother or father. None of that supersedes a child's right to be known and loved by their mother and father. Like, I just think that in all of these conversations, we have got to train people to have the them before us mindset. And I will say, I have unfortunately got to jump onto another call, but maybe we could continue a conversation
Okay,
another
because I'm
time.
dying to know whether you think
Absolutely.
parents have rights. So we'll grab you back.
Parents
Yeah.
have rights to the children that come from them. When you gave birth to your children at the hospital, you didn't want to take just any baby home. You wanted one specific
Mm,
baby. You have a pre-political right to one specific baby. You don't have a right to every child in the nursery. You've got a right to one of them. And that's why properly understanding children's right to their mother and father, it folds perfectly together. Those things go hand in hand. True parental rights are reinforced by genuine children's rights.
great. I want Katie back on because I have
Oh
another
yeah, we'll
five
get her back
questions
on.
easily.
Thank you
Okay,
so much.
then.
Thank you
Thank you
so much.
guys.
Thank you so much.